Hello! Today is a continuation of my articulation series. That means yung tamang pagbibigkas ng mga speech sounds. And today is about how to produce s. Now, I know a few months ago, I already discussed how to fix your lisp. So that's the distortions of S and Z. But this video is going to be more about how to introduce the S to your kids na wala pa naman talagang S. And some of the most common speech errors na nangyayari during this time of learning it pa lang. Kaya tara, usap tayo. Let's get talking. Hello! If you're new here, I'm Teacher Kaye and I'm a certified speech language pathologist. Like I said, today is about the S sound. Typically, we notice children at around 3 years old trying to start imitating the S sound and using it on their own. But the mastery and clarity of how they produce this sound can differ from just producing it on its own and then in word form, in different parts of the word, in the initial, medial, or final parts of the word, or in connected speech, like when they're already talking in sentences. So let's start with the basics. Paano ba talaga natin nagagawa ang S sound? So usually I start with giving the cue of biting, and then smiling, and then blowing out air. Pero syempre sa atin kasi parang madali na yon. But for children na parang kailangan talaga ng step-by-step breakdown, here are some more details into those steps. So why do I ask you to bite? Because it's a reminder na dapat yung dila nila hindi lulusot through the teeth. And in this case, sometimes I like to call the teeth the cage para mas madaling sabihin, o pag bite mo, dapat hindi mag-e-escape yung iyong tongue from the cage. So bite. And then why do I smile? When we smile kasi naturally, yung mga muscles ng ating bibig ay naturally medyo magre-retract. And this puts our tongue in kind of a better position to be prepared for making the S sound. So again, the first few steps, bite and smile. Wow! Now, the last step is just to blow the air out. But sa ibang children, again, you have to be very specific about paano mag-blow ng air out. You have to tell them na dapat hindi sa gilid pero sa harap. As if they're trying to blow the air out through their front teeth. So again, bite and smile and then blow air out. So if I do this, ano kayang tunog? So, hindi masyadong clear na S, right? What's missing? The placement of my tongue. My tongue needs to be around the area of the alveolar ridge. Huwag magpanic. I will show you where the alveolar ridge is. It's just that area behind your two front teeth. So, I'm going to point it with my tongue. That's where the alveolar ridge is. But you don't want your tongue to be pressing against the alveolar ridge. Kasi kapag press natin yun ng matigas, wala nang way for the air to escape above the tongue. And that's where the air needs to escape from. Or else mag-escape siya sa gilid and it's going to give us a weird slushy sound. So we can also reverse the steps by giving the reminder of putting the tongue up first. Tongue up, bite, and then smile. And then blowing out. So those are the exact same tips that I gave in my lisping video, but I have one more tip that I want to share with you guys. This is especially helpful for the children na ang mga initial attempts nila at making the S sound start to sound like a T sound. For example, di ba kumakanta kayo, twinkle, twinkle, little star. Hindi nila nasasabi yung S sound. So this is a good opportunity to start with the T. Dahil alam mong nagagawa na nila, T. Tar, tar. So what we can do is pwede natin silang sabihin, okay, can we try to make the t, t, t sound 3 times? Let's try it together. T, t, t. Now from that example, you can tell that the t sound is a short sound. Hindi mo siya maproprolong. But what happens if we try to imagine prolonging the t sound? So make all the correct positions of your tongue, your mouth when you're making the t sound, but then try to sustain it by blowing air continuously through the front of your mouth. I'll show you again. I'll say it 3 times, t, 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 and then I'll try to sustain it. Let's do it together. Wow! Oh, diba? S na agad. It's also very similar to the sound effect na we try to make kapag parang nakahawak tayo ng something na mainit, diba? That sizzling sound. So, kunwari nakahawak tayo ng mainit na kaldero. Tss! Oh my gosh, ang init! So, these are some ways that you can introduce the S to your babies. Now, what if napakita mo na yan lahat, pero parang minsan nagagawa ni baby, minsan hindi pa rin niya nagagawa? I'm going to give you ways on how to cue your children para mas maging consistent yung way na ipapractice nila ito. I've mentioned this technique in some of my other videos kasi efficient siya talaga. So this is when we pretend not to understand what they're trying to say. Always remember to take note of yung frustration tolerance ng anak ninyo kasi wag nyo naman i-overdo yung pag-pretend. You can do it 1 or 2 times and then move on na kayo. So a specific example, again, let's go back to nursery rhymes. What if you're trying to sing Itsy Bitsy Spider, pero ang nasasabi lang niya, Itty Bitty Spider. Tapos parang pwede mo sabihin, anong kanta yan? Di ko yan maintindihan. Alam ko, Itsy Bitsy Spider. Tapos, tingnan mo kung yung reaction niya. Usually, natatawa sila na, oo nga no, parang hindi nga pareho. Some children will not even understand na, parang yun din naman yung tinatry ko. So, there's also the level of awareness of your kids. But for some older kids na mas marami ng vocabulary of different words, you can try to make use of minimal pairs. Ang minimal pairs po ay mga words na isa lang yung difference sa kanilang spelling but it changes the sound of the entire word. So one example in Filipino is when you want to say silaw, as in sobra na yung ilaw. But see, kapag hindi mo masabi yung S, either masasabi lang nila ilaw, ilaw ako, ilaw. Or masasabi nila, tilaw. So again, you can pretend, anong gusto mo pa ba ng ilaw o nakakasilaw? Another example is, kunyari nakita mo, ay, may song na nag-play, tapos gustong sumayaw ng baby mo. Tapos sinasabi mo, gusto mo bang sumayaw? Sayaw tayo? Tapos sinasabi niya, ayaw, ayaw. Sabi mo, ayaw mo ba? O gusto mo? Sige, patayin ko na lang kung ayaw mo. Gusto mo bang sabihin? Sayaw? So these are just some tricks and you can make lists of your own minimal pairs kung ano yung relevant na araw-araw baka na sasabi niyong words at home. Now, what about verbal cues? So obviously, verbal cue now when you try to teach them the sound, but it's also verbal cues kapag tinuro mo yung mga sinabi kong steps. Like, remember to bite. So, the word bite, maalala nila na, nga pala, dapat hindi lulusot yung tongue ko dun sa cage. And then the other verbal cues na don't forget to smile or don't forget to put your tongue up tongue. Now, what about visual cues? Visual cues, kahit yung pagturo nyo lang na pay attention to my mouth, look again. My tongue is where? It is up, nasa likod ng ngipin ko. And then you point to where you are placing your tongue orally. Like that. So that's already a visual cue. I also find this visual cue of using my hand to demonstrate the movement of the tongue very helpful. So for some of my clients who forget to lift their tongue, I always make this cue for them. Don't forget. So we want to say 6 and bus and mask. And then it helps them remember na, I lift my tongue when I'm about to say the S sound. Another very important visual cue is introducing the letter S to them so that every time you encounter it kapag nag-story time kayo or nag-read kayo ng books together, you can point to the S's. So you can say, the poo story. And then you're highlighting that that's the sound that we make when we see this letter. Also, another visual cue that I like to use to highlight the S is a sustained sound is by pointing to things that are long. So, for example, this snake, aside from highlighting and sustaining the S before I continue with the word snake, you can also show them, look, the snake. And then visually, itatrace mo yung haba ng snake. Snake. We can also do the same thing with worms. Oh my gosh, they're so long. Worms. How many worms? So many worms. You can also do this with toys that can roll. So for tactile cues, for example, they're trying to say, oh, look at the bus. Pero ang nasabi nila, look at the butt. Oh, we found another minimal pair, bus and butt. So when you know they're trying to say, give butt, pero ang di nila masabi ay bus. So ibigay mo yung butt mo. Sabihin, is this what you want? Gusto mo ng butt ni mommy? Or do you want the bus? So when you're trying to say bus, unfortunately, I don't have a bus toy here with me right now, but for now, I'm going to use this motorcycle. But for example, they're trying to say bus. So you can say, bus! Hanggang matapos yung pag-roll ng bus off their arm. And this tactile cue again will remind them that it is a sustained sound and they need to keep blowing air out until you finish saying the S. For older kids that already have a pretty good command of their fine motor skills, yung mga ibang kinesthetic things that you can do with them are asking them to trace the S. And for the duration of the time na pinoproduce nila yung sound, dapat they keep blowing the air out. So kunwari, you have a book and you see, there's the letter S. Let's say the S. Or for other kids that can already write, you can ask them to do that, and that's a good kinesthetic cue for them to remember the connection of the S is a sustained sound. For other children that like to move, other things that you can do with bigger movements, for example, you have toy worms or toy snakes, and even if gusto nyong gawin reward ay let's say, fruit, gummy worms or something, so you can use the worms tas kunyari magre-race kayo. So gumawa ka ng finish line, tas meron kayong hawak na gummy worms. Sabihin mo, if you can produce the S or kung kaya mong sabihin yung S all the way to the finish line, you can eat the gummy worms and also mommy's gummy worms. Ready? Get set, go! Tapos mag-race kayo to the finish line. Kapag nasabi niya, the whole time, then the baby can have the gummy worm. Yay! So don't forget to praise their attempts to imitate the S sound, and if you can see that they're really trying to move their articulators to the right positions, always say things like, I see that you're trying, we'll get it next time. Even if we don't get it this time, we can try again, and things like that. The great thing about targeting S is meron din siya sa sariling wika natin in Tagalog. So marami tayong words na merong S. And in English naman, aside from marami ring words naturally may S, yung pluralization nila na may S, dagdag practice pa. Kasi lahat ng ipo-pluralize mo, pwede mong gamitan ng S sa dulo. But this does not cover na kapag natutunan na nilang bigkasin yung S, ay alam na nila kung paano mag-pluralize. So this video does not cover that. This is only how to produce the S. This video also does not cover how sometimes the S's in English sound like a Z. So, syempre, exposure na yon sa English language. So, ang importante lang dito is they can even produce the S sound clearly. And I think I've given you guys enough tips and activities that you can try with your kids. So I hope that this was helpful. And if you found this helpful, someone else might find it helpful. So please don't forget to share it. And for any clarifications or just mga anecdotes of you guys trying the S's, ikwento nyo sa akin on my Facebook and Instagram at Teacher Kaye Talks. And if you haven't yet clicked that red subscribe button, come on now, join our community. And hanggang sa muli, happy talking and mabuhay! Para maging mas